Princess Zarathiel of the Valdorian Empire had perfected the art of invisible existence. Even aboard the massive diplomatic vessel Nexus Dawn, surrounded by delegates from 17 different species, she managed to occupy her corner of the observation deck without drawing so much as a curious glance. Her translucent blue skin shimmered faintly in the starlight, and her 4 delicate arms moved in practiced gestures that deflected conversation before it could begin. She preferred it this way. As the 7th daughter of Emperor Vex Thul, she held no real political power, served no crucial diplomatic function, and represented nothing more than a ceremonial presence at these tedious interspecies negotiations. The other delegates saw her as decoration, beautiful, silent, and ultimately irrelevant. Until the humans arrived. Captain Rayan Torres of the Earth vessel Defiant Spirit had requested permission to dock for emergency repairs. His ship limped into the diplomatic zone trailing plasma and debris, its hull scarred by what appeared to be a recent battle with Krillian raiders. The Valdorian command grudgingly granted docking privileges, though they made their displeasure clear. Humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, barely a century since first contact, and many species still viewed them as primitive warmongers. Zarathiel watched through the viewport as the human ship maneuvered alongside the Nexus Dawn. Unlike the sleek, bioorganic curves of Valdorian architecture, or the crystalline geometries favored by the Centaurians, the human vessel looked almost brutally functional. Armored plates welded over damaged sections, weapon ports that had clearly seen recent use, and a design philosophy that seemed to prioritize survival over aesthetics. She found herself oddly fascinated. The airlock cycled, and Captain Torres stepped aboard with a small diplomatic contingent. Zarathiel retreated further into her corner, expecting the usual pompous introductions and territorial posturing that characterize these meetings. Instead, she found herself studying the human captain with growing curiosity. He was shorter than most species represented here, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His uniform was practical rather than ornate, and he carried himself with the economical movements of someone accustomed to cramped ship quarters. What struck her most, however, was how he acknowledged everyone in the room, not just the important delegates but the service staff, the junior officers, even the maintenance crews. When his gaze fell on her shadowed corner, he paused. For a moment, their eyes met across the crowded space, and Zarathiel felt an unfamiliar flutter of something. Nervousness? Anticipation? Before she could analyze the feeling, one of the Centaurian ambassadors demanded his attention, and the moment passed. The next several hours unfolded predictably. The various species representatives offered perfunctory assistance, while making it clear they considered the human presence an inconvenience. The Krillian delegate even suggested that perhaps human shipping lanes should avoid this sector entirely, for their own safety. The subtle threats and diplomatic condescension flowed as freely as the ceremonial wine. Captain Torres endured it all with remarkable patience, his expression neutral even when Ambassador Veltar of the hegemony questioned humanity's readiness for galactic citizenship. Zarathiel found herself growing increasingly uncomfortable with the proceedings, though she couldn't quite understand why. The breaking point came when the Krillian delegate, emboldened by the apparent support of the other species, openly boasted about the lesson his raiders had taught the human merchant vessel they'd attacked the previous day. 17 human dead, he chittered, his mandibles clicking with amusement. Perhaps now they'll understand that certain trade routes require protection fees. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Captain Torres stood slowly, and for the first time Zarathiel saw something dangerous flicker behind his calm exterior. The merchant ship Hope's Fortune, he said quietly, was carrying medical supplies to the Tau Ceti colony. Cancer treatments for children. The Krillian delegate's laughter died in his throat. You murdered 17 people, Torres continued, his voice never rising above conversational level, who were trying to save dying children. The silence stretched painfully. Then, to everyone's shock, Princess Zarathiel of Valdor rose from her corner and stepped into the light. Captain Torres speaks truth, she said, her voice clear and steady despite the tremor in her hands. I monitored the communication frequencies. The human vessel broadcast medical emergency codes throughout the engagement. They never returned fire even while dying. The assembled delegates turned to stare at her in amazement. In 3 years of diplomatic missions, the Valdorian princess had never spoken publicly, never inserted herself into negotiations. "Princess," Ambassador Veltar began patronizingly, "perhaps you misunderstood." "I understood perfectly," Zarathiel interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. She looked directly at Captain Torres, drawing strength from his steady gaze. "What I misunderstood was how we could sit here, offering empty courtesies to a man whose people died trying to heal children, while entertaining the creature who murdered them." The Krillian delegate bristled. "You forget yourself, little princess. These humans are nothing." "These humans," Zarathiel said, stepping closer to Torres, "have crossed half the galaxy to bring medicine to strangers. When did the Krillian Confederation last act with such compassion? When did any of us?" She turned to address the entire assembly, her earlier invisibility transformed into commanding presence. "We call ourselves civilized, but we practice the diplomacy of cowards. We negotiate with pirates and murderers while scorning those who risk everything to save lives they've never met." Captain Torres watched her with something approaching wonder. This ethereal princess, who had seemed so fragile and removed, was facing down representatives of species that could obliterate her home system with a single fleet. "Princess Zarathiel," he said formally, "would you consider accepting passage aboard the Defiant Spirit? It seems your talents are wasted here." She looked around the room at the shocked faces of the delegates, then back at the human captain who had somehow inspired her to find her voice after years of silence. "Captain Torres," she replied with the first genuine smile she'd worn in months, "I thought you'd never ask." As they walked toward the airlock together, leaving behind a room full of stunned diplomats, Zarathiel realized she was finally stepping into the life she was meant to live. Not as a decorative princess hiding in corners, but as someone who stood up for what was right, even when it meant standing alone. Well, she thought, glancing at her new human friend, perhaps not entirely alone. Behind them, the emergency session of the Diplomatic Council was already dissolving into chaos, but neither of them looked back. They had more important things to do, like saving the galaxy, one act of human decency at a time.